All right, welcome y'all to another series of bite-sized science webinars with Florida Sea Grant UF IFAS Extension. We're going to give everyone a few more seconds to enter the room. I see a few of you who have joined us before. Welcome back. All right, it looks like, all right, some more might join us, but we'll go ahead and get started. So again, good afternoon and welcome to another series of our bite-sized science webinar recordings. My name is Brittany Scharf. I am the Florida Sea Grant agent located in Hernando County. And today we are joined with by Angela Collins, who is our Florida Sea Grant specialist down in Manatee County, and Anna Zangrones, who is Miami-Dade Florida Sea Grant agent. They are going to be talking to us today about Goliath grouper. A few housekeeping rules though before we get started. We do have everyone's microphones muted and cameras off. So if you do have questions for Angela and Anna during their presentation, please type them in the chat box. And then at the end, we'll get started with those questions that you guys have. So I'll hand it over to Angela and Anna.
Awesome. Thanks, Brittany. Really great to be here. And thanks everybody for joining us for another Bite-Sized Science. Angela and I are thrilled to talk to you today about the Great Goliath Grouper Count, which is a citizen science program that is a partnership between Florida Sea Grant and Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So I'm going to start out and give you all a little bit of the background information about this fish and why this program was created. And then Angela is going to take it away and tell you more all about this project. So Angela, next slide. All right. So if you're not familiar with the Goliath grouper, this is a pretty phenomenal fish. And I'm really glad to get the chance to work with Angela and Brittany and our other Sea Grant agents around the state to participate in this program. And part of the reason that this fish is so neat is because, as the name indicates, it's huge. It is the largest grouper in the Atlantic, and that includes the tropical and subtropical waters off of the Americas as well as Africa. And Goliath really means it's a big fish. And I like this photo that you can see here on the right of your screen that gives you a little bit of perspective of what one of these fish looks like next to a person. You can see that's a person probably 5 or 6 feet tall, and it's right in the face of a Goliath grouper, which is comfortably 3 to 4 feet long in this image. And that's not as big as they get. They can get up to about 8 feet long and grow up to 800 pounds. They are very slow growing fish and tend to reach reproductive maturity around 3 to 4 years of age. So that's pretty old in a life of a fish in this part of the world. And so that makes them, among other things, pretty vulnerable to threats. And while the age of 3 to 4 is pretty average for that reproductive maturity, there have been some later bloomers, and we'll see individuals up to 6 to 8 years old before they become reproductively mature. And unfortunately, they are vulnerable to a number of both natural and anthropogenic threats, particularly algal blooms, namely red tide events, extreme weather events, especially when they're cold events, and from a coastal development perspective, the loss of their nursery habitat, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a few minutes. These fish have a pretty complex life cycle. They spawn offshore. So in the bottom photo on your screen, you'll see a photograph of a spawning aggregation. This tends to happen out in deeper water, usually around artificial reefs. And during spawning, the female fish will release their eggs into the water while the males will release sperm. And once the eggs become fertilized, they are pelagic and they will drift and be dispersed by ocean currents, at which point they will eventually make their way into mangrove areas. And mangrove shorelines, especially red mangroves, serve as the predominant nursery habitat for these fish, in which these fish will live there for their first couple of years of life, using the prop roots of the red mangroves as their habitat and as their shelter. And once they literally outgrow that habitat, they will then move back offshore to coral reefs and artificial reefs to continue living their best lives. So really neat. And I love the photograph on the right because it shows that, all big things, they are babies at some point. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that these fish are found off of the North and South Americas. And in the image on the left, you will see an approximate representation of their range. And that includes waters in the tropical Western Atlantic, off the eastern coast of the United States, as well as within the Gulf of Mexico, off the US, Mexico, and South America. And there was one historical population off of the African coast. However, that population no longer exists. And the highest numbers of this fish are found off of Florida's Gulf Coast. And that's thought to be due to the fact that there is the most available wonderful nursery habitat off of Florida's Gulf Coast. And if you look at the photograph on the right, I think there might be an animation there. There it is. Thanks, Angela. And that white arrow is pointing to the western edge of Everglades National Park and the 10,000 Islands area. And if you're familiar with that area, you should be aware that you'll probably familiar with the largest numbers of intact mangrove systems that we have on that coast. Next slide, Angela. Thanks. Now, this fish has a fascinating history when it comes to how it was utilized in the last 100 years or so. And the fisheries for Goliath grouper have existed for centuries, both for recreational as well as nutritional purposes. And in the early days of the fishery, large numbers of adults were not harvested. It usually was just a few trophy fish here or there. And the peak of this fishery really took place during the 1970s and 80s. And that was when the price of meat increased. So a natural response to the phenomena of supply and demand. And what coincided with this was we started as people really advancing our technological capabilities to be able to fish better. We fished better, we fished more, we caught more, and really had, between Loran and GPS and bottom finders, we had a really great ability to not just find the fish, but also harvest. And we're ready for the next slide. Thanks. So where this really started to become problematic was in the 1980s, the numbers of Goliath groupers started to decline. And this was brought to the attention of resource managers by commercial fishermen who were noticing their catch numbers declining. And that collaboration, or I shouldn't say collaboration, but communication between that fishing community and the managers was a critical component that led to the emergency closure of Goliath grouper harvest in 1990. And unfortunately, because they form these large and very predictable spawning aggregations and are pretty comfortable around people. And I should have said this a moment ago, but that also makes them really easy to catch. So as a result of all that technology, knowing where they were, being able to find them, we ended up with this closed fishery. And while Goliath grouper were removed from the National Marine Fisheries Service Species of Concern list in 2006, they still remain listed as critically endangered under the IUCN Red List. And now, where are we? 1990, 2022, 32 years after this emergency closure, we have started to see changes in the population. And that comes with both benefits and drawbacks. And one of those drawbacks is that there has been a little bit of confusion about how the Goliath grouper are interacting with the public and vice versa. And so in this case, Facebook relationship status, it's complicated. And on the left, you see some of the common complaints associated with Goliath grouper. And the first being that they are a nuisance, and I'll give it the air quotes, nuisance. And that complaint comes from the fact that these are opportunistic fish, and they have been known to go after food that is put right in front of their face. And we've seen this when Goliath grouper will snatch bait off of a hook and line. And they are opportunistic, and between you and me, if someone puts food in front of my face where I can get to it, I will probably reach out and grab that first rather than walking over to the buffet line. And coming along with that is this idea that Goliath grouper will eat everything. So snapper, grouper, crabs, lobsters, license plate, you name it. Those are some of the things that have been thought that Goliath grouper are eating. And also this idea that too many of a good thing will negatively impact other species. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact that none of these claims have actually been substantiated in the scientific community. So these are perception complaints that are coming as a result of a native species starting to return to what its historical population was. So of course, if you started fishing in 1990 and didn't have a lot of interaction with Goliath, and then fast forward 15 or 20 years, as the numbers have started to return, it's highly likely that you're going to have more interactions with the fish. On the other side of the spectrum, there are quite a lot of benefits that Goliaths provide to the ocean and to our local habitats. And one of those is that Goliath grouper do enhance habitat and increase diversity on reefs. And that's largely due to their ability they scoop out and create little hidey holes and improve reef habitat. They contribute to reef structure, or what we like to call rugosity. Additionally, there's a quite large positive economic impact associated with Goliath grouper. And Schittler and Pierce did an economic study a few years ago that looked at diver willingness to pay. So in other words, scuba divers were surveyed to see how much they might be willing to pay to go on a dive where they would get to observe Goliath grouper. And I don't remember the exact figures associated, but it was a lot of money. And that was proven quite positive to our local economy, especially in Southeast Florida, where a lot of the predictable spawning aggregations occur. And lastly, when it comes to management of a species and in responding with an emergency closure, this is considered a very well done success story. I do also want to make the mention that this is a native species. So this is not an invasive species. This is not an exotic. This is a species that is naturally occurring in Florida waters and was removed to the point of being almost completely wiped off. And now they have been so well managed that we're starting to see numbers a little bit more reflective of what the historical population was. Now there's still lots of questions and information that are being studied, and it has been found that the juvenile populations in those nursery habitats are increasing. However, natural events like red tides or harmful algal blooms, as well as prolonged cold weather events, those, it's hard to know when they're going to happen. They are naturally occurring, but those could lead to declines in the juvenile populations. And then the other really big flag in terms of population success are where and how are those nursery habitats thriving or being protected. So those are important things to consider, particularly for a fish like this one that has such a complex life cycle and uses so many different parts of our coast for their life. It has been seen that the populations of adults are increasing offshore. However, because the way the tools that traditional stock assessments are performed at the federal level, they're not quite working for this species. And that's largely due to the fact that a lot of these fish are assessed by looking at fisheries dependent data, or in other words, what fishers are catching. And since this is a fish that has been prohibited from catching, the data for in that way aren't really all that effective for this particular species. And so that's part of where the Great Goliath Grouper Count was born, to help starting to answer some of those questions. And I'm going to pass the baton over to Dr. Angela Collins, who's going to tell you all about this program.
Thank you, Anna. That was a fantastic background on Goliath grouper biology and management history here in the state of Florida. I just kind of want to point out what Anna just mentioned regarding the stock assessment and the issues that stock assessment managers have run into previously, and kind of indicating the full status of Goliath grouper recovery throughout their range has been limited because there are no traditional fishery data for this fish since 1990. So there are lots of different organizations, from academic universities to government agencies to local nonprofit groups, that have been looking at Goliath grouper for decades. This is a fish that I actually did my PhD dissertation on, so they're kind of near and dear to my heart in that way. And I kind of wanted to just throw out there that there are a lot of different groups and a lot of different data collection initiatives that have been ongoing for Goliath grouper throughout the state of Florida for quite some time. And those include things like tag and recapture studies, as well as genetic sampling and acoustic tagging and visual surveys, which is a fantastic way to get information on Goliath grouper. As Anna mentioned, these fish are very approachable underwater. They do occur in waters that are quite accessible to humans. Typically, when you find them, their maximum depth is really not quite past 200 feet. So they're typically found inside 200 feet, makes them very accessible to divers. They're very approachable underwater. And because of their size and their shape and their visibility, they're quite easy to identify, which makes them an excellent candidate for citizen science data collection. And that brings us to the Great Goliath grouper count. So this was something that actually began 13 years ago. I was a biologist at Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and Florida Sea Grant actually came to us and said, we want to get more information and involve stakeholders in the collection of data for this fish, because it is such a emotionally charged species here in our state. And so it actually started along the southwest coast of Florida, and it was, again, a collaboration, as Anna mentioned before, between Florida Sea Grant and the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And then those groups reached out to volunteer divers who were actively observing this fish underwater and wanted to contribute data to the management agencies. And so what this does is allows people that dive and see Goliath grouper anyway to get out there and provide feedback to us. Allowing participation from this kind of citizen science group allows us to cover a really broad geographic range in a very short amount of time. So the Great Goliath grouper count happens every year during the first 2 weeks of June. And by incorporating these volunteer divers, we're actually allowed to see a lot more during a very small time frame than you would be able to do, say, if you had to use your research vessels or a government funded program to do this. So this is a great way to collect a lot of data efficiently and effectively in a short amount of time. And this kind of provides a snapshot of the Goliath grouper abundance at sites throughout the area. We have been able to incorporate some of these observations that citizen scientists have provided over the years into the management process. And if you looked at the last CDAR stock assessment for Goliath grouper, the Great Goliath grouper count was one of the pieces, just one. There are lots of pieces that go into that big puzzle, but the Great Goliath grouper count data were utilized in the last stock assessment process, which is a great success story for this program. And as we continue to expand it through time, that data becomes even more valuable because you get this long-term data series. So if you're interested in participating, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of us or your local Sea Grant agent for more information. So I kind of wanted to give you kind of an image of what this has looked like over the past 13 years. And this map just demonstrates all of the artificial reef and natural reef sites that have been surveyed during these 2 weeks of June over the past 13 years. As I mentioned before, it started in the southwest Florida coast because this has historically been the center of abundance for this fish. But through time, we've expanded this effort to include sites up in the panhandle of Florida, as well as along the eastern Atlantic coast of Florida and the Florida Keys. So it has really expanded and grown through time, which is fantastic. This animation is just kind of going to show you sort of the number of surveys that have taken place per year. You're seeing time go by as the colors change. That's the year advancing. The size of the circle indicates the number of fish that were observed at that site. So you can see in the early days, we were really just focused on the Southwest Florida coast. As time moved on, we started to incorporate some sites up in the Panhandle and some sites off of Miami-Dade County. Some years were better than others based on weather and diver participation. 2020 was a complete bust, as most of you know what was happening in 2020 during that time. And so 2021 was much better. People were ready to get back in the water. And we're hoping that this year we'll have another phenomenal data collection effort. So one of the things that people record besides the number of fish that they see on a site is the size range of the fish that they're observing. So each fish that they get gets thrown into one of like a small, medium, and large size class bin. And we're able to sort of get an idea of the size distribution of the Goliath grouper that are present on these sites through time. Now, this data is reflective of not only the number of fish that we see, which is indicated here by the bar graph, and then their size classes as indicated by the different colors. We've got small and light green, medium, which is 3 to 5 feet in blue, and then large are those big ones over 5 feet long. And those are indicated by the gray colors. But we also have these dots here, and these dots are reflective of the number of surveys that were performed in that year. So typically, if you have more surveys, you're going to see more fish. So this graph needs to be taken with a grain of salt. Don't just look at the bars. You have to remember that the number of surveys that are performed that year definitely influence the number of fish that are going to be counted. But what I did want to point out on this graph is that we are seeing the full size range of fish throughout the state. We're seeing the little ones, the juveniles, the ones that are less than 3 feet. These are probably not mature fish. And we're also seeing a good distribution of the medium and the larger animals. And this is, again, that same data set sort of broken down into region. And what I wanted to show you here is that when you really start diving into the data that you get from an effort like this, you can start breaking out trends through time. And so what we've done here in these graphs along the bottom are showing you the regions. So this is Northwest Florida in the blue. Southwest Florida is indicated by this green color. Southeast Florida and the Florida Keys is indicated by yellow. And you can see right away that we are seeing the largest numbers of fish in Southwest Florida region, which we would expect. This has always been their center of abundance. This is where the most perfect nursery habitat continues to be for the fish. So this is where you're going to see signs of recovery the earliest and probably to the greatest extent. And you can see that through time, you know, the average number of fish, which is indicated by this bold bar, which within each one of these box plots, is relatively stable in Southwest Florida. You can also see that there's kind of an absence of data in Northwest Florida and Southeast Florida in the early years. And this is because we didn't have very much participation in those regions, but we are expanding our scope. And so if you're in one of those regions and you want to continue to provide data, please don't hesitate again to reach out to us. And then this is kind of the general take-home message, is people always are like, well, what have you seen through time? Are they increasing? Are they decreasing? And the answer is the Great Goliath grouper count data, again, just one portion of the data that are available to assess the status of the species, is they really don't show a trend up or down through time. So we do have kind of a stable observation trend line in the number of fish that we're seeing since we started the effort 13 years ago. So again, this, if you want to participate, you can scan this URL or go to the Florida Sea Grant homepage and find out more information about the Great Goliath grouper count. We're more than happy to provide data sheets and protocols and a training video to you or your group. And this is especially important right now because for the first time since the stock was closed in 1990, the Goliath grouper was protected from all harvest in 1990. For the first time since that moment, FWC has approved a small take of Goliath grouper in state waters. This was decided at their commission meeting in March of 2022. And so beginning in the spring of 2023, a small number of these fish will be permitted for harvest. There are going to be restrictions associated with that. There will need to be a permit that you will win through a lottery that costs some money, and you'll need to pay for the permit if you win that lottery. There's also a slot limit associated with the allowable harvest. So there are a lot of pieces that go into this harvest, and it will only occur in state waters, but this is happening. So the importance of continuing to collect data in these long-term monitoring efforts is a really great way to track any potential impacts on the status of the population through time. So we would like to really thank you guys for listening today. Anna and I are both available to answer any questions. But before we get into those, if you don't mind to take a few moments to just complete this quick poll.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Angela. So yes, on your screen right now, you should see a poll. So please take a few moments and answer these questions. It helps us to evaluate our webinar series. I have also posted a website in the chat box. It's the same website that you went to sign up to be able to view today's webinar. Our next one, please join us, will be July 7th at 12:30 p.m. And we're going to talk about marine debris and how citizen scientists can become involved in that. On this same website, you can also, if you've missed any of our previous webinar series, you can go and view those recordings, and today's recording will be housed there as well. And if you do have any questions, please take a moment and type them in the chat box, and we will answer them when we are done with the poll. All right, so far, folks are letting Anna and Angela know it was a great presentation. And you did a great job. I always learn something new from the both of you about Goliath grouper.
I have a question for Angela really quickly, and just curious how, especially if the new rule from FWC allows for this minimal harvest, is there going to be a component of that requires people to report when they catch something? Where do they report it? If they report it, that kind of stuff, that maybe that will help inform a fishery dependent.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. FWC is working on exactly what is going to be required, but at a bare minimum, the total length, the location, and potentially a fin clip for all individuals that are harvested will need to be submitted as part of the permit agreement for that tag. But I think that they're still ironing out the details on all of the data that they're going to require. Cool. That's a good question.
And I am not seeing any other questions come in through our chat box. So again, you have both Angela and Anna's email in the chat, as well as the website for you to join us next month, July 7th at 12:30 p.m. And
yeah. Hey, I'm sorry. I just wanted to comment to Dave real quick. Absolutely, Dave, you're right. They steal everything. They don't just steal your bait. They steal what's on your line after you've used your bait. I've watched them take full-size legal cobia. They're completely capable of stealing a lot more than just bait, which is part of this part of the problem, right? The interaction between anglers and Goliath is definitely a complicated one. And the easiest way to avoid them is to try to go to lower relief habitats or not artificial reefs, because they do aggregate at artificial reefs. And once they start eating your stuff, it's like a dinner bell, and they can be really painful to fish around. So we get it.
all right, again, thank you, Angela and Anna, and we will see everyone next month. Have a great afternoon.
Bye, everybody.